In December 1991, the world watched the red flag fall for the last time. Over the Kremlin, the symbol of an empire, gone. After 70 years of power, fear, and ideology, the Soviet Union, once the mightiest superpower on Earth, simply ceased to exist. But the fall did not come from the outside. It came from within. This is the story of the Great Fall, how a dream of equality turned into dust. Chapter 1. The New Face of Power. The year was 1985. In the ancient city of Moscow, the air was heavy with silence and suspicion. The Soviet Union had endured 6 leaders since Stalin's death. Brezhnev had died an old man clinging to the past. Andropov and Chernin followed, short reigns marked by illness and stagnation. The country was exhausted. Factories stood still. Store shelves were empty. The people, once promised a utopia, lived in a constant state of waiting for bread, for change, for hope. And then came Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev. He was young, only 54, charming, intelligent, and unlike any Soviet leader before him. The West saw him as a reformer. The old guard saw him as a threat. But for millions of ordinary citizens, Gorbachev was a light in the darkness. He looked at his nation, vast, wounded, proud, and knew something had to change. The Soviet Union could no longer survive by pretending everything was fine. The cracks were too deep. Chapter 2. Perestroika and Glasnost. Gorbachev's vision had 2 names: Perestroika, meaning restructuring, and Glasnost, meaning openness. For decades, the Soviet system had relied on silence and fear. Now, suddenly, people were allowed to speak. Newspapers began printing truths once forbidden about corruption, poverty, the horrors of Stalin's purges, and the failures of the war in Afghanistan. In kitchens and in factories, people whispered words they had never dared to say out loud. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe the party is not eternal. Gorbachev believed that by freeing speech he could save socialism, but in doing so, he unleashed forces far beyond his control. The truth had been buried for 70 years, and now it was roaring back to life. Chapter 3. The Crumbling Economy. The Soviet economy was a machine built for war, not for life. For decades, billions of rubles had gone into tanks, missiles, and nuclear silos, while factories producing food and clothing stood empty or obsolete. In the countryside, farmers lacked equipment and fertilizer. In the cities, citizens waited hours in line for bread or sugar. The government's statistics said everything was fine, but the reality was catastrophic. The ruble was worthless outside Soviet borders. Black markets thrived in every city. Alcoholism and corruption were spreading like disease. Gorbachev tried to reform from within, to make socialism more human, more flexible, more efficient. But socialism was never built for flexibility. It was built for control, and once you loosen control, everything begins to fall apart. Chapter 4. The Empire Trembles. The Soviet Union was not one nation. It was a vast empire, 15 republics, hundreds of ethnicities, dozens of languages, all held together by one idea: Moscow knows best. For decades, the smaller republics like Ukraine, Lithuania, Estonia, Georgia, Armenia had been silenced. But with Glasnost, voices began to rise. In the Baltics, protesters gathered under their own flags, singing forbidden songs. In Georgia, rallies filled the streets demanding independence. For the first time in memory living, people no longer feared the KGB. One historian later said, "The Soviet Union was not destroyed by bombs, it was destroyed by songs." Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the outer circle of the Soviet world, revolution was in the air. In Poland, the Solidarity movement, once crushed by tanks, was reborn. In Hungary and Czechoslovakia, reformers demanded elections. And in Berlin, the divided heart of Europe, the wall that had stood for 28 years, began to crack. Chapter 5. The Fall of the Wall. November 9, 1989. A day that changed history. Thousands gathered at the Berlin Wall, chanting, crying, climbing. The guards, confused and overwhelmed, did not open fire. And then the unthinkable happened. The gates opened. East and West Berliners embraced in tears. Hammers smashed concrete. Pieces of the wall, once a symbol of division, became souvenirs of freedom. For the West, it was a victory. For Moscow, a disaster. The empire's outer shell had fallen, and soon the center would follow. Chapter 6. The August Coup. By 1991, the Soviet Union was falling apart. One by one, the republics declared independence. Hardliners in the Communist Party, men who had built their lives on power and control, saw Gorbachev as a traitor. They decided to act. In August 1991, while Gorbachev was on vacation in Crimea, tanks rolled into Moscow. A group calling itself the State Committee for the Emergency Situation announced that the president was ill and that they had taken control. But the people had changed. Tens of thousands flooded the streets. They surrounded the White House, the Russian Parliament building, building barricades, facing the tanks. Standing atop one of those tanks was Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic. He raised his fist and shouted, "We will not let them take our freedom." The world watched live on television as the empire that once silenced half the planet could not silence its own people. Within 3 days, the coup collapsed. The generals surrendered. The old party was broken, and the Soviet Union, mortally wounded, had only months left to live. Chapter 7. The Last Days. The final act of the Soviet Union was not a battle, but a quiet, painful surrender to reality. December 1991. In a forest near Minsk, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met in secret. They signed an agreement declaring that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics no longer exists. A few weeks later, Mikhail Gorbachev appeared on national television. His face was tired, his voice calm. "Dear comrade citizens, we have accomplished great things together, but the old system has failed. The Union no longer exists." That evening, the red flag above the Kremlin was lowered for the last time. In its place rose the flag of Russia, white, blue, and red. No shots fired, no battles fought, just silence and the realization that an era had ended. Chapter 8. After the Fall. In the months that followed, the world changed overnight. 15 new nations were born from the ruins of the Soviet Union. Russia inherited the nuclear weapons, the debts, and the memories. The Cold War, the 40-year standoff that had defined the 20th century, was over. For the first time since 1945, the world had only one superpower. In the streets of Moscow, people celebrated, but also mourned. Some felt freedom. Others felt loss, the loss of identity, of purpose, of empire. Inflation skyrocketed. Savings vanished. The black market turned into capitalism overnight. Millions fell into poverty, while a few, the new oligarchs, became unimaginably rich. The Soviet dream was gone. but its shadow still lingers in politics, in memory, in fear. Epilogue: The Lesson of the Empire. History is full of empires that thought they would last forever: Rome, Byzantium, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union. Each fell not only because of outside pressure, but because they lost the faith of their own people. The Soviet Union was born in revolution, forged in war, expanded through ideology, and destroyed by truth. In the end, it wasn't the bombs, nor the spies, nor the West that defeated it. It was its own contradictions, the dream of equality built on fear, the promise of freedom enforced by control.
On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union was officially gone. But its story, its echoes, still shape our world. The borders drawn, the alliances formed, the fear and pride that remain, all are the children of that great collapse. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that no empire, no matter how powerful, can survive once it stops believing in itself.